everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming to February's GHAC meeting on aquaculture and flood farming. And David Rains is going to present for us. So,
all right, guys.
Take it over.
So, I'm sure you guys know the industry is changing a little bit. There's some different markets that are closing due to government bans, like Indonesia. Fiji's been tightly monitored lately, so there's less coral and live rock coming out of there as well. And then there's also people talking about Australia possibly closing their coral trade. So what's happening is, there's several people that are importing coral illegally. They're not using the correct CITES permits, stuff like that. And the governments are trying to keep the coral from being over-collected, which is, it's a good thing. It's going to change our industry a lot. So what you're going to see is there's going to be a lot more people aquaculturing coral. There's a lot of different techniques. What they'll do is a lot of people will buy different SPS, LPS, or soft colonies, and they'll put them into a grow out system with good lighting, good equipment, calcium reactor, stuff like that to make sure that they're well nourished. And then they let them grow out, and then you take a saw or a cutter of some kind and you propagate the coral, because each polyp on that coral is a separate organism. So what they do is they grow and they'll collect on an entire rock or a base of some kind, like a porcelain disc, which is what we put them on. And once they're grown on that base, you can cut them into tiny pieces, which is called microfragging. And you can put multiple pieces on another disc, and the multiple pieces will fuse together and create another colony a lot quicker than they will if you just have one frag and you let it grow out by itself. So that's a new thing, microfragging. They're actually doing that to try to repopulate the reefs now. They'll microfrag on a disc and they'll put it out on the reef, and then within a year they have, a 3 or 4 foot coral out of like 100 microfrags. So one of the things that we're going to be doing at Urban Aquatics is we're going to be transitioning to aquaculture as well. We're going to be building out 4 1,500 gallon systems back here in the back of our shop. And what we're going to try to do in there is we're going to have a quarantine system just for bringing in coral. Anything new is going to go through a strict quarantine process. Different dips, different antibiotics, ozone, UV, just to kind of clean it all up, because there's bacterias, there's protozoan parasites, there's worms, there's all kinds of things that come in on these corals that you kind of have to get rid of, because if you don't, they're going to take over anytime you have some kind of a temperature swing, alkalinity swing. Those things thrive in that situation because your coral's immune system drops. So when you see tissue coming off a coral, or coral is not doing well, it's mainly because of something that is part of the environment. It's not right. Your water chemistry's off, something like that. When that happens, those protozoans or cyanobacteria, Vibrio, which is the flesh-eating bacteria, which everybody's heard about, that's present in almost every piece of coral you buy. So the recent scientific research shows that those bacteria and those microprotozoans that you don't even see unless you have a microscope are the ones that are causing the white band disease in the ocean. All of the mass coral reef die-offs, the latest research is showing that when the temperature fluctuates from El Nino going through that area, that it causes the coral to stress out, and then all those bacteria that are living symbiotically with the coral are actually taking over and smothering it out. And that's why you have the massive die-off really quick. So you're taking it from a coral reef and you're changing it to basically a different ecosystem, which is filled with algae and other organisms and other fish, which is a natural process. It happens all over the world. So what we're trying to do here is we're going to try to bring in as many species of coral as we can and quarantine them. And then once they're quarantined, we'll move them into a middle section, which is going to be our long-term quarantine, or watching, basically to observe them. Once we feel comfortable with that, we'll move them into our grow-out system, and we'll leave them in our grow-out system for a minimum of 90 days before we start to frag them or try to propagate. So, you guys have any questions?
So on the I've seen people doing like the aquaculturing out in the actual ocean. How does that differ from what you're going to be doing in house?
So that's mariculturing.
Okay.
It's actually a lot easier to do that because in the ocean, you know, you don't have the fluctuations you have in a smaller system and stuff like that. What's happening though is those are all the same corals. When I say wild coral, really that's all that's coming in is mariculture coral.
Oh, really?
Now.
Okay.
And what's happening though is because the government officials don't know what coral is actually maricultured and you can mariculture,
Yeah.
they're not educated enough to know what they're shipping out and what the CITES permits are for. So these people are committing fraud, and they're saying that one coral is another coral, and they're shipping out 30,000 more than they're supposed to be in a year. Like one that's really bad is the Acanthophilia or the open brain corals. They had, I think last year in Indonesia before the market shut down, they had a CITES quota of like 500, and they sold like 35,000.
Holy crap.
So a Dutch company came in and did an audit on all the coral farms that were doing the mariculture. And when they did the audit, they found out that they were going and collecting these donut corals, or the Acanthophilias, and they were chopping the bottom of them flat and gluing them to a porcelain disc and saying they were cultured. So when the government found out about that, that's why there was the automatic shutdown out of nowhere.
Yeah. Okay.
Because Susi, the person that runs the Indonesian fish and wildlife side of the government, found out about it, and she will not process any health permits for the shipment. So if you don't have a health permit, you can't import it. So she shut it down. And from what I hear, every time I talk to somebody there, they're always in talks trying to figure out what they're going to do to open the market back up, but so far it doesn't look like there's any traction. It actually seems like there's more traction in the opposite direction, because she's trying to meet with other government entities in other states or countries to try to get them to kind of bolster what she's doing, which I think it's not a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
The ocean needs to be able to heal, but the only bad thing that could come out of it is the mariculturing is actually a good way to, give back to the reefs. When they mariculture the coral, they can take those corals back in areas that have had white man disease and stuff like that, and they can repopulate the reefs at a later date. I mean, the industry's kind of in flux right now. There's no telling what's going to happen. There's no sureties at all that the markets are even going to open back up. Like I said, Australia is questionable moving forward. So you're going to see prices of coral coming in from Indonesia. If it does open back up, it's going to go way up, because they're actually going to have to put people in place to do these audits and check on the coral and everything now, and they weren't doing it before.
Yeah.
One of the things I heard was they might use x-ray machines to x-ray coral skeletons to actually look into the coral skeleton and make sure that they're actually the right CITES permit for the coral. Other than that, there hasn't been really any positive movement on opening the market back up there. So what we plan on doing is buying up a lot of named coral, stuff that's already been brought in aquaculture, and we're going to quarantine all that. The latest research shows that even when you quarantine coral, that it's not 100% clean. Like I said, everything has bacterias and everything else living with it symbiotically. The coral dip doesn't get rid of all that. The only thing to get rid of the bacteria is a lot of times different antibiotics. So unless you use like 7 different antibiotics to treat your coral, you're not going to clean it up completely. That's why everybody gets cyanobacteria at some point or another. Everybody gets dinoflagellates. There's all kinds of different things that come in with coral. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to do as much quarantine as we can with antibiotics and everything else to have the healthiest coral that we can. That's what the long-term quarantine process is going to be for, is for observation and also treating with antibiotics.
So how long do you think the process would be from getting something started in the first quarantine to selling in your
Probably
showroom?
6 months.
Okay.
At least. And that's on a fast track. me really to dip things enough to get flatworms and the larger parasites that we all know about off of the corals. You need at least 2 or 3 weeks to do it the right way, because you need to dip it one time, dip it again for the eggs or the juvenile, their offsprings, and then do it again just in case you miss something, in case they're getting immune to the dips you're doing. And then once you're pretty comfortable that it's clean and you haven't seen any bite marks or anything on the corals, then you can move it to the next system. As far as other ways to check it, you can always use a microscope. We have a microscope here that we use for analyzing different parasites to see what we have. We'll take like a little tissue culture, put it on a slide, and we can see the tiny protozoans. People call them black bug, but you have to use a 300 times magnification to even see them.
Wow.
So once you put a coral dip on those, you can actually watch. You can drop a coral dip drop in the actual slide with the protozoans, and they stop moving immediately. But most of the time in a regular coral dip, it's not getting rid of those, and it's because we're not using a high enough concentration, because we're afraid of killing the coral. So if you think about it, all those things living symbiotically in the coral or within the coral skeleton, it's probably tough on the coral too, because when those things die, if you dip them harsh enough, then there's still going to be ammonia and everything within the coral's structure. So it's really kind of a delicate balancing here. You got to be really in tune with what's going on with your system and with your coral, and you have to pay a lot of attention. Test your water on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day, just to make sure you're not having fluctuations. That's the main thing. It's just, it takes good husbandry. So attention to detail.
Makes sense. Do you have any, do you have to have different types of systems for different kinds of coral when you're aquaculturing them?
So I like to keep my systems at natural seawater levels. A lot of people like to run higher alkalinity, higher magnesium, higher calcium to try to get their stuff to grow faster. But what happens is, when you don't have, nature is the way it is for a reason. Those corals grow, their coral skeletons grow in a certain way when they have certain amounts of calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium that are in the ocean. Now, when you change something, like you raise up your alkalinity to try to get higher coral growth or faster growth, it'll grow faster, but you can take your finger on an SPS colony and touch the tip of it and it'll break off. A coral from the ocean, you can take it and take bone cutters and try to cut it, and you can't cut it because it's so dense, because the coral has actually metabolized all that the right way, because it's all at the right levels. It's kind of like us when we take a multivitamin. There's only so much our bodies can use up before it's wasted. Well, if we took one thing and just pumped it in ourselves, we wouldn't be balanced, right? So our bodies wouldn't be healthy. It's the same way with coral. So that's why your calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium all needs to be within a certain range for it to work.
I don't know about that.
So, any other questions?
Is there a dip that you recommend?
So there's several dips we use. I like iodine, mainly for soft corals, LPS. It'll get off any kind of flatworms. It also is a good prophylactic dip for like bacteria and things like that. I used to use Coral RX when it was in the market, but it's not available anymore. I've been using Revive lately. It's really strong, so you have to be really careful. You kind of have to test it out and see what you want to dose as far as your dip goes, how much you want to concentrate it. As far as other dips, there's a new dip out that's called STN or RTN Stop, which is actually a really good dip. It's actually killing off the tiny protozoans also. And I think I'm just guessing here, but I think he took the Revive or the Coral RX dip and he mixed in, what is that? It's an antibiotic powder. Everybody uses it. going blank here. No, it's not erythromycin.
Fenbendazole?
I can't think of it. What'd you say?
Fenbendazole, whatever that one is.
I think they're mixing antibiotics in with the dip.
Okay.
So I think that's what's killing them.
Maybe? Tetracycline?
No, it's not that. I can't think of it. It's right on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of it.
Anybody else know any antibiotics to throw out there?
Anyways, this coral is called the coral dip is called RTN or STN stop, and it's kind of expensive. It's like $50 a bottle, and $50 a bottle will make 5 gallons of coral dip. So if you do smaller dips, that coral STN stop will last you a while. If you need to use a lot of it, that can be very expensive. So that's why we're going to do separate dipping stations or separate systems where we can do different types of treatments. There's also another treatment that people have been using, which is Interceptor. You know, the old pills you gave your dog to get rid of fleas or ticks. People have always used that in the hobby, but now the new Interceptor doesn't have the same active ingredient as the old one. So what I did was I found the active ingredient in it, and I talked to my veterinarian, and I found something else that I could use to get the same effect, and it's called Melbamite. It's a mite treatment for cats or even cows for their ears. It kills the ear mites. Same active ingredient. It's a liquid form, so it's easier to actually dose it at the right amount to kill any of the protozoans or crustaceans. The only problem is when you use that, you can't use it in a system that's going to have hermit crabs, any kind of crabs, shrimp, anything like that. So these are, yeah. You wouldn't use it with any kind of invertebrates at all. So basically, another way you could do it is you could use the antibiotics and just do it by itself in antibiotic treatment for a week or two, and just make sure you go through the whole course. If you don't go through the whole course, you're going to end up creating a super strain of bacteria it's just like us when we were supposed to take our entire course of antibiotics. So you just have to follow the directions, do what if you get it from a veterinarian, you have to do what they tell you or follow the directions. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. In that same coral study I was talking about earlier, where they were finding the protozoans and the bacteria living symbiotically in the corals. They also did a controlled test on corals. They took them and they actually cleaned them completely of all the bacteria and all the protozoans by doing all the different antibiotic treatments, right? Well, they found that after they did the antibiotic treatment on an SPS colony, that they were able to keep that SPS colony up to, I think, 37 degrees Celsius in water without it dying.
Huh.
So it's basically boiling water. It didn't affect the coral.
Wow.
And that's because the bacteria and everything couldn't take over when the coral stressed out.
Huh. Interesting.
So it's really interesting. It's kind of amazing. I mean, it makes sense though. If you look at the deep sea diving that they're doing now, all the new things they're discovering, the life that's down in the abyss, it's 200 or 300 degrees in some of those spots, and there's live coral and organisms there.
Yep.
So, yeah. Anyways, it's we find out new information almost every day in our hobby, obviously, because the ocean's huge and hasn't been really the surface hasn't even really been scratched. So there's gonna be new stuff coming out all the time, and I look forward to learning about it.
When do you plan on setting up your aquaculture stuff?
So we need to get some new permits for the building. Once we get the permits done, we're going to start hopefully within the next 90 days.
Cool.
So the tanks we're going to put back here are 4 foot by 8 foot by 2 foot deep tanks. We're going to do rows of 2 each, so it's going to be 8 of those total. And we're going to have halides over our main grow out system, and the rest will have LEDs. The halides will probably go at 20K radiums because they get the best color and par for your system, faster growth. And then we'll have Distaco calcium reactors for each system. just because they have controllers on them, you can monitor your alkalinity easier with them. You can actually turn a dial on the reactor to change your alkalinity. That's what we use on our main system here, and they work great.
Awesome.
Anybody else have any questions?
Nope.
There's
Thanks very
no detriment to, because you're talking about the bacteria existing symbiotically. There's no detriment to clearing it out all out.
They said that the coral is that they did the controlled test just to see what the reaction would be from the coral, and they said that really temperature fluctuations, alkalinity fluctuations, things like that aren't altering the coral's health at all, really. So they think that it actually is the bacteria and the other stuff that's living symbiotic with it, which is causing it to die, because it's out competing it because it's a perfect condition for that and not the coral. So it starts growing like crazy, which causes the coral skin to evacuate. The skeleton is actually, like the corals, what they do is they build layers and layers and layers, right? And the skeleton that's underneath it is porous. So all those organisms can get inside of the skeleton anyhow they can, really. I mean, if they're microscopic, they can get in there. So really that's the way it's happening. It's from inside out. They're getting consumed. Well, I appreciate you guys coming.
Thanks, David.
Nice having you guys. Thank you for coming out.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.